Good evening, all. Welcome to the online public information meeting for the proposed rezoning of the sites known as 1414 and 1416 Main Street in the Varsity View neighborhood. My name is Tony Wood. I'm a planner with the City of Saskatoon Development Review section, and I'll be your moderator this evening. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that the land upon which we broadcast and the land that we are discussing today is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. As you're all probably aware, the city is conducting all public consultation online, over the phone, and via letter mail these days due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This Teams Live event is one of many ways that we are attempting to facilitate adequate public consultation while remaining physically distanced. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our Engage page afterwards. This will allow residents who are unable to participate to watch the video in the future. I'd like to start off by introducing the wonderful city staff who have made this live event a possibility. First and foremost being Jim Charlebois. Jim is a senior planner and the project lead who will be presenting on behalf of and responding to questions from the administration, or for the administration. Our development review section manager is Daryl Dawson, and he's with us here tonight and maybe responding to the occasional question. I would also like to make everybody aware that several city staff are joining us in the background this evening to keep things running smoothly. They are Haven Rees, Catherine Kambites, and Tanner Hallinan. Their assistance has been instrumental in hosting this event. I would of course like to introduce the applicant for the proposed rezoning, Mark Kelleher from Blackrock Developments, who will also be presenting on the proposed development. And last but definitely not least, Councillor Cynthia Block has graciously agreed to join us tonight. I will now turn the presentation over to her for opening remarks.
Tony, thank you so much for that, and thank you actually for including me. It's important for me to be here to hear from the residents and find out your feedback and some of your ideas and concerns going forward. This is an important project, and I know a lot of work has gone into it. I want to thank all of our staff who are on the call tonight and everyone else in the background who has been working exceptionally hard to ensure that what we are bringing forward is going to be at a stage that the questions that you will have will be able to be answered. So I will be listening tonight to what you have to say and also what our administration has to say. I'm interested to better understand how they have considered the residents, especially the ones that are living very close to this proposal, to find out how that's been considered and how overall their conclusions have made it to this point so far. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to hearing from everyone this evening.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Block. Now, before continuing, I'd like to briefly outline the structure of this public information meeting. Firstly, we'll be hearing the presentation from our administration, outlining the proposed amendments and how these would function within existing policy. Following this, we'll have a presentation from the applicant, wherein they'll provide an outline of their proposed development. Afterwards, we'll begin the question and answer period. At that point, I'll be outlining the Q&A function on Teams Live, as well as reviewing our code of conduct. Similar to our regular in-person public information meetings, we'll be requesting that you save your questions until the end of the presentation. Once we have responded to all questions or reach the end of our allotted time at 8:30, I will offer some closing remarks and end the live event. I will now turn the virtual mic over to Jim for the presentation from the administration, which will immediately be followed by the applicant's presentation.
Thank you, Tony. If we could just step forward to the location map slide, please. So thanks again, Tony, and thank you to everyone participating tonight. This first slide shows the location of the proposed development site, corner of Main Street and Cumberland, just north of 8th Street and north of Cumberland Park. Just wanted to provide a little bit of information on our notification for the meeting tonight. Our application page, our Engage page for the application was live as of November 24th. We sent out public notices on November 27th to a distance of about 225 meters from the proposed development site. This is in excess of what we typically do. The normal public notification is usually around 150 meters. We've also installed development signs on both of the properties just to provide as much notification as possible. Prior to tonight's meeting beginning, we have received a few email submissions about the proposal, one of them in support of the proposal and two not in support of the proposal, as well as a number of comments, a couple of comments through phone conversations that haven't been in support of the proposal. And just for information, the comments, questions that we received for the application prior to through tonight and following the meeting will be included in an engagement summary report to the Municipal Planning Commission and then on to Council. So there have been a number of fairly significant policy changes that the city's approved since the original application on the site in 2015. So I thought I'll just take a few minutes to walk through them. The first one was the growth plan to $500,000, which was endorsed by Council in 2016. This plan was actually under preparation while the Varsity View local area plan was under preparation. And what it really does is chart a new path for the city with a balanced approach to growth. So a balance between outward expansion, greenfield development with infill development. And the infill target for corridor planning and the corridors in particular is a 25% infill target. We also had an OCP amendment in June of 2017 to establish the corridor planning program. That program is focused on detailed land use planning activities along the city's major transportation and future BRT corridors. Following that, the corridor planning team began in the fall of 2017 through to the early winter of 2019, a fairly extensive public engagement program. And that led to the preparation of the corridor transformation plan that was presented to Council and endorsed in January of this year. The transformation plan is essentially a long-term plan and vision document that provides direction not only for future corridor plans and infill development, but for development applications such as the one we're talking about tonight, where corridor plans have not yet been prepared. We're at a stage right now that the corridor planning team is just gearing up to work through the process for preparing corridor plans. So we're in the fairly early days of a transition from the new policy framework. Transformation plan also, sorry if we can just go back one slide, Haven. Sorry, the transformation plan includes land use descriptions, different types of guiding principles, as well as design guidelines. And those are also reflected in the new official community plan that was approved by Council in July of this year. The land use designations, there are 4 different land use designations included in the new official community plan that respect corridor growth. So this is a map of the corridor growth area. This was our study area for the past 3 years for the corridor planning work. It's approximately a boundary of 250 meters on either side of the BRT corridors. You can see the detail of the map with the red box around it. That's the location of tonight's subject application site. And you can see the blue line in the detail is also, that's 8th Street and the proposed blue line BRT. You'll notice that this site is close to the edge of the corridor growth area boundary. And so that boundary is fairly important in the extent of the corridor planning policies as they relate to existing neighborhoods. The application does require an official community plan land use amendment. And so the proposed amendment is from the current low density residential 1, this is the new land use designation in the new OCP, proposed to amend it to corridor residential. This will be the first time that we actually use this new land use designation, and you can see the proposed development site on both of those maps is outlined in red. So just a little bit of detail about the corridor residential land use designation in particular. So this designation is to be applied for lands that are not located directly on that BRT corridor. So for lands not on 8th Street, for example, it's really intended to be an area of transition from the higher but still medium densities located along the corridors into the existing adjacent neighborhoods. That idea of transition is a fairly important component and key concept for corridor residential. Its key objectives are to help achieve the residential infill targets of the growth plan. In total, the targets for new residential growth within the corridor growth area are 22,000 new units spread throughout that entire map area. It's also to provide a range of ground-oriented residential housing types and different sizes to provide a broader number of housing choices on the housing spectrum. So I wanted to touch on a little bit the relationship between corridor residential and the corridor planning program, and in particular the Varsity View local area plan. So what you're seeing on the screen right now are the goals, the 7 goals from the local area plan. And the ones that are highlighted in purple, and I'll read them off, numbers 1, 3, 4, and 7. Those are goals that are directly related to the intent and the purpose of corridor residential. Through our evaluation, we feel that there's a fairly strong relationship between the goals of the local area plan in these cases to provide the protection and preserve the lower density areas in the heart of the neighborhoods and to enable some sensitive developments along those major edges, with the corridor residential intention of providing a transition, sensitive transition from the higher densities on the BRT corridors into those existing neighborhoods. So we do feel that corridor planning and corridor residential in particular, and local area plans in general, but specifically the Varsity View local area plan, really can complement one another and support infill development while at the same time helping to protect some of those really key lower density characteristics of this neighborhood. So the proposed zoning for the site is from R2, 1 and 2 unit residential, to RM4, which is medium high density multiple unit dwelling district, subject to a zoning agreement. So just a little bit of detail on the proposal. As I said, subject to RM4, subject to a zoning agreement, and I'll cover what a zoning agreement is in a moment. The proposal is for a 4-story building, a maximum height of 15 meters, with a 2-story component that is adjacent to the existing residential dwelling. The proposal includes a 49% site coverage, maximum permitted under the zone is 60%. It's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units for a total of 26 dwelling units. Parking is located both in a combination of underground and surface parking. There are 42 spaces required under the zoning bylaw and 42 have been provided. One of the requirements from our internal review is that the lane adjacent to Cumberland Park, so to the south of the development site, will need to be paved. The sidewalk on Cumberland has already been paved. That's one of the comments that came from the review in 2015. And should this development proceed to construction, a street tree management plan will be prepared in order to protect the existing street trees on the site or adjacent to the site. So just some details about, sorry, if you can just go back to one slide. Just a little bit of details about what a zoning agreement is. We use it as a planning tool to help enable a very specific type of development proposal. Through that tool, we can address the use of land and buildings, the form and exterior design of those buildings, as well as the site layout. And it's a specific bylaw, site-specific bylaw passed by council that will only permit the development as outlined on those proposed plans. We're using a zoning agreement in this case because the new zoning districts for the corridor land uses have not yet been prepared. So just some next steps in the process. Following tonight's meeting, we'll prepare a report on the proposal to the Municipal Planning Commission. We are anticipating moving that onto the agenda for the January meeting. And as I mentioned earlier, there'll be a summary of comments and questions received in advance and through tonight's meeting. That'll be included in an engagement summary report. That'll be an attachment to that report. Council will also receive that report. And when this application is ready to move on to council and a public hearing, we'll be providing notification in the Star Phoenix at least 2 weeks in advance. And from here on out, what we'll be doing is updating the application's engage page with not only the dates of Municipal Planning Commission, but other components. We're going to be posting this presentation on the engage page, as well as a recording of tonight's meeting. So with that, what I'll do is turn it over to Mr. Kelleher to walk you through his proposal.
Okay, thank you, Jim. First of all, good evening to everybody who attended tonight. Thank you very much for participating in the meeting. Thank you, Councillor Block, for attending, and thanks to the city staff. You've been working hard. We had a few little hiccups there and we got through them, so I appreciate all the work that you put into the meeting tonight. I want to start by sharing a little bit about Blackrock Developments, a little bit about myself, and then talk about the proposed Calabasas project. So my company is Blackrock Developments. We've been building homes in Saskatoon for over 15 years. We've built homes in many of the Saskatoon's new neighborhoods, and we specialize in infill developments. Varsity View is one of the neighborhoods we do a lot of work in, one of our most enjoyable neighborhoods to work in. I've personally been in construction for over 20 years. I've always lived my adult life in Saskatoon, many of those in Varsity View, and I'm a proud graduate from the University of Saskatchewan. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Calabasas. Jim mentioned about the location. The location is the southwest corner of Main Street and Cumberland Ave. We're proposing to build condos that I believe will be suited for all demographics. There are grocery stores, restaurants, coffee shops, dental offices, and many other necessities all across the street. With Cumberland Park across the alley, several schools blocks away, I think this would be a great option for families with children to include in their home search. And with the university and the hospital, a 20-minute walk down Cumberland, this location will attract both students and professionals as well. This location is very walkable, very bikeable, and has public transit options right beside the property. My hope is that people will choose these alternatives for getting around rather than defaulting to driving their vehicles. So the proposed building has, we can go back just one slide there, please. The proposed building has 2 stories, 3 stories, and 4 stories. We're proposing 26 units with a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, ranging in size from approximately 650 square feet to 1,910 square feet. Here you can see the ground floor units can enter directly into their homes from the street. These direct entrances help improve the relationship between the street and the proposed building. Also, hopefully with more foot traffic entering and exiting the building at various locations, safety will be enhanced. On the west here portion of the building, or on the right hand side, you can see that the building is 2 stories high, and this is to blend in with the neighboring properties. As you move east, the building goes up to 3 stories, and there are 2 units proposed on the 4th floor. These units on the 4th floor are set back from all sides of the building to help conceal the height and minimize the massing. The exterior is designed with stone that will resemble Tyndall limestone used at the University of Saskatchewan. There are many engineered fascia and soffit wood features, And the remaining of the building would be either maintenance-free fiber cement siding or stucco. These are all premium finishes selected to ensure the building will stand the test of time. So on the site plan, you can see there's 12 surface parking stalls at the rear of the building, and there's an additional 31 stalls underneath the building in an underground parkade. All access to the surface and parkade parking will be off the rear lane, keeping vehicles away from pedestrian walkways. I think this is ample parking for the number of units, and I do not have any concerns about potential parking problems with this proposed development. The parking ramp is located at the southwest corner of the site. I feel this is the best spot as there are several benefits to this location. It allows over 20 feet from the west property line to the sidewall at the rear of the building, which will significantly reduce any massing for neighbors on the block. This 20-foot setback will also help reduce early morning shadows. And also parking ramps are quite often pushed right up against the property line. In this proposal, I've moved the parking ramp over to the east, so there's over 5 feet of space between the parking ramp and the property line. Again, this is to enhance privacy and keep vehicles a generous distance from the property line. So on the next slide, we can see here we have 5 beautiful elm trees in the boulevard flanking the front of the lot. One of the reasons I love working in Varsity View is all the existing trees that bring timeless value to the neighborhood. These trees were considered at the very beginning stages of the design. None of these trees will need to be removed or significantly altered for the proposal and will be diligently protected should construction take place. I've spoken with Urban Forestry and will keep in contact with them to develop a comprehensive tree protection plan, as we do with all infill projects should construction take place. A couple other design features here you can see is on the west side of the building. There's actually 7 feet of property between property line and building. This goes beyond the minimum required setbacks. Again, another feature just to be sensitive to neighboring properties. As you can see here, the 2-story roof line on the west of the building is very similar to the roof line of the adjacent properties. Again, I think this helps blend in new property with the existing properties. So on the next slide, we have some elevations. There are a few design features here that were done deliberately, again, to be sensitive to the neighborhood. So here, there are no exits or entrances on the west. These are located on the north and east. This will keep foot traffic along Main Street in Cumberland and not between properties. There are also no balconies on the west elevation, enhancing backyard privacy for owners along the block. Also, another small feature is we have windows that are circled here on the east elevation. These windows will be placed high near the ceiling of the units. And this is meant, these windows are just meant to provide additional light. I'm estimating them to be about 5 feet off the floor. So this will help prevent sight lines from people looking into backyards when they're looking west. In the last slide, I had some modeling done to show potential shadows during August. One more slide ahead, Tony. Oh. There you go. There's always shadows with that new buildings create or any buildings create. However, because of the many design features, the unique location, the width of Main Street, these shadows will be minimal. From these studies, I don't believe there'll be this fringe location.
Oh,
So I believe with this fringe location, the pedestrian connectivity, the thoughtful design, sensitive features, this proposal can bring a welcome positive change to the neighborhood. It would have my full attention from start to finish, and in the end, hopefully, a successful example of how we can continue to grow and change both as a city and a neighborhood in a smart, efficient way. So thank you again for attending tonight and taking the time to listen to the proposal.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for your presentations. As mentioned at the top of this live event, we will now begin the question and answer period. The Microsoft Teams user guide provided on our Engage page will greatly assist with this. So if any of y'all out there tonight have the Engage page open, there is a user guide for the Teams question and answer function, which I will outline now. On your Teams Live application, you should see an icon for the Q&A function. It looks like two small chat bubbles. One of them has a little question mark on the inside. Once clicked, it should display the title Live Event Q&A. If you'd like to submit a question or comment, click on the big purple button at the bottom that states Ask a Question. This will take you to the My Questions tab, where you can type a question into the Ask a Question box. I've made it sound a bit more confusing than it is. Once you get there, it's pretty self-explanatory. Participants are expected to ask questions, make comments, and behave in a manner that is respectful to all participants in the meeting. Appropriate and relevant questions will be published in the featured tab for all to see. Furthermore, if you see a question that you'd like to have answered in the featured tab, you can have it marked with a thumbs up. This helps popular questions rise to the top instead of having multiple people submitting the same question. So a very useful feature on the Q&A function there. Presenters, as questions are published, I'll be reading each aloud and directing them to the appropriate party. In some cases, this may involve multiple people, in which case I'll provide a speaking order. I have a feeling that a lot of these will end up being directed to our two presenters, Jim and Mark. I think this covers up most of the necessary information for the Q&A. If you haven't already, please begin typing your questions. So we have nothing in there for now, so just wait for some of that stuff to come in. Jim, did we have any questions in advance that perhaps could serve to generate some discussion while we're waiting for these questions to arrive from attendees?
Thanks, Tony. We didn't have any questions specific to the development. We did have some opinions about whether or not the proposal fit in with the neighborhood. As I mentioned earlier, a couple feeling that it doesn't fit with the neighborhood and one feeling that it does, that it would be an improvement. So there weren't any, unfortunately, weren't any specific questions that we could start to address now. I would maybe ask Councillor Block if you had any questions yourself for staff or for Mark related to your what you might have heard from residents themselves.
Well, I'm more than happy to try to get the conversation going, because I think that, I mean, this is an important discussion, and I had a whole slew of questions that I've been asking over the course of the last week or so. So maybe I'll just get the ball rolling. So I think that one of the questions I have that I'm not entirely clear about is if this project was going to come to council, and we're being asked to decide about a rezoning by agreement, but it has to do with the corridor plan, which is now going to be its own zoning, the way I understand it. And so if I heard you correctly earlier tonight, are you saying that that the reason that it has to go to council directly for rezoning, not just for the amendment, is because we have not passed this corridor plan at this point?
No, this would be a rezoning application of its own right. We're using the zoning by agreement as the tool because the new zones that will be created for the new corridor land use designations haven't yet been written. Council, as you know, just approved the OCP in July. It just got provincial approval in September. And the corridor planning team is just starting down the road of creating those new zones. So there would still be a zoning application and a rezoning process, but it would just be to a zone created specifically for the corridor growth area, one of the 4 or 5 different zones.
And sorry, the corridor piece is just for this one specific area.
Yeah, it's just for the corridor growth area. That's the map that was shown earlier in the presentation. That's approximately 250 meters on either side of the BRT corridors. So that area is very much focused on corridor growth and infill development and helping to achieve that higher level growth plan to 500,000 goal of focusing more development in an infill manner versus just greenfield.
Okay, I think I understand it, but I think I also think I understood that corridor piece that hasn't come to us yet, but it's just a little bit different than what I've seen previously with regards to rezoning. So I appreciate that clarification. The other question I had was around the local area plan. I appreciated that you went through sort of how some of these pieces go together. I was hoping that you could maybe just expand on that a little bit about how the city considers proposals like this against the backdrop of an LAP in 2014, a growth plan approval in 2015 or 16, I believe. We have a city center plan, a corridor plan. I mean, there are many moving parts, I guess, is my point. And I'm wondering how the city prioritizes or considers these as you discuss proposals like this.
So we really do look at kind of all the pieces of the puzzle, to use an analogy. One of the reasons that I wanted to highlight the policy changes from the original 2015 application was just to give residents and participants in tonight's meeting a sense of how much change there has been in our policy framework in the city. We have taken really significant steps in focusing on infill development, focusing on corridor growth and all the pieces that go along with corridor growth. So that focus on infill development is to help support the BRT, and the BRT will actually help support residents and employees and business owners and whatnot from not having to get in their cars all the time. So there's a really strong relationship there between land use and frequent transit service. So that's one of the key elements of the growth plan to 500,000 as well. So when looking at this application, not just from the corridor growth perspective, but also from the local area plan perspective and other city policies, you know, we're looking to be more of a sustainable city. We have a chapter in the new OCP about sustainable growth that speaks specifically to infill growth as well and corridor growth. So we're trying to pull all these pieces together to evaluate, in particular right now, this development proposal, but to evaluate as we go forward and as corridor plans are prepared, kind of all those relationships between new policy and previous policies and plans that have been created, to make sure that we're looking at kind of all the pieces, so that we can come forward to council at a time and make a recommendation on this or any other development proposal related to corridor growth.
you know, I wanted to ask a question of the proponent, but I just on that line of answer, I just have another question of you, Jim. Just how have we considered the, like, I'm in terms, sorry, I was going to ask the evolution of the project to the proponent. Sorry, I missed what I was going to say. What was it? Oh, I know what it was. So when you look at what you were trying to achieve with those infill goals, how do you consider the interior of neighborhoods? I guess more specifically, how can residents be assured that we're not going to add density to the next house over and the next house over and the next house over to the interior of neighborhoods?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if I could ask, Haven, if you could move the slides back to the slide 5, the corridor growth area map. This is a really important map in not only in the conversations the corridor team had, so this map, so that boundary has not only, as I said earlier, been the study area boundary for corridor planning, but it's now the boundary for the corridor growth policies. So to your question, Councillor Block, that protection of the interior of neighborhoods, that's where the line stops to some degree. So you'll see that it is a fairly wide line, but it's intended to not proceed beyond a 250 meter kind of average distance from the center line of that BRT corridor. So this is where the transition, the sort of more sensitive transition and the pieces of the complementary pieces of the corridor residential policies and the corridor residential land use designation and those goals that the Varsity View LAP contains in terms of protecting the interior of neighborhoods and trying to provide that really sensitive transition of densities and provide more housing forms and those kinds of things. This purple line that you see on the map is where that stops. Now, yes, there will be increases in density, and to some degree there needs to be in order to be able to meet those growth plan targets. The city cannot continue on a path of low density, single family residential development. That's what the growth plan identified, that we need to focus on infill development. So what the corridor residential land use is intended to do is to provide opportunities to have these discussions, to find ways of increasing the density in existing neighborhoods in a sensitive way. So one of the density metrics for corridor residential is that it's a low to medium density land use designation. That means, you know, you could see duplexes, but you could see up to what this development is proposing in terms of density and building height. What you won't see is something higher than that. You won't see a 10-story building in corridor residential. That's not what it's intended to do. It is really intended to help provide that transition of densities, but then also to some degree, the protection of that kind of the heart of those existing neighborhoods.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was very helpful, Mr. Charlebois. I'm wondering from the proponent, if you could walk me through how you considered the neighborhood. I mean, you definitely pointed out some pieces around shadowing and the rest of it, but as I look at the building and the way that it has been designed, I guess I'm curious to understand how the neighborhood was considered.
Yeah, well, you know, I like that particular style of building that I like, and I think when I incorporated the design features, I am being sensitive to the neighbors. There's all kinds of features in the building that that brings in you know, that is sensitive to not only the neighbors but the block. And you know, I think if you go through Varsity View today, in the last even 3 or 4 years, it's changed significantly. There's all kinds of forms of building, so I don't think there's one kind of particular style or building type that belongs to Varsity View. I think, you know, as the neighborhood changes, we're going to see all kinds of different styles all kinds of different, different features. And so, I think that this building, although it doesn't look like a traditional 1950s bungalow or a small 1950s wartime house, it's something that I think that will, when driving through the neighborhood in 10 years and seeing all the other new products that are going to be added to the neighborhood, I think it'll blend in very nicely.
And my apologies, Mr. Kelleher. I by no means was trying to wage an opinion on what it looks like, because quite frankly, I think it's a beautiful rendering. That's, again, all of those types of things are going to be in the eye of the beholder, and there's many examples throughout the ward of varying types of architecture that, just for anyone out there listening, the city doesn't get to take any control of. It is under the Cities Act of provincial jurisdiction, but I take no issue whatsoever. I think it's a beautiful build. I guess I'm just thinking more specifically, and I know that you alluded to it, but I think that this project has evolved over the course of the years since you had initially intended to build, and just wondering how those characteristics changed. I mean, you spoke about the shadowing, you spoke about the height as it's referenced to the house that is next to it. I guess I'm more interested in how the thought process goes as an infill developer to fit into a neighborhood and to be respectful of the neighbors.
Yeah, well, I think I'm being very respectful for to the neighbors and to the whole block, and I also think I take my cues from the city. The city has made major changes since last time we looked at this project, particularly the corridor growth plan. We're talking about investing huge dollars into a rapid transit system that is 100 feet away from this building. So I think that's the intent of those type of investments that the city is going to make comes hand in hand with adding more density to the neighborhood. So, I felt before this was a great location. Even now, with the progression that the city's made with their growth plan, with the corridor plan, I think it's a great fit. We're going to have to add people in order to use those services that we're investing in as a city. So, I think here's a very sensitive way to do that, right on the corner of I think, two busy streets. Cumberland Avenue particularly has got lots of traffic. And another note is there's really, I've in the last few years, I've asked people to, if they have any interest in that corner lot. It's just not suited anymore for a single family dwelling. So that has changed as well. And plus with the redevelopment across the street, Kitty Corner, I mean, those are things that I look at. I watch what the city's doing, the direction they're moving, and I think this checks nearly all the boxes of the growth plan objectives, the corridor plan objectives, and so yeah, that's sort of my thought process, how I what I think about that location.
Mr. Charlebois, would you indulge me to ask one more question of the proponent?
Absolutely.
Or do we have a list? Or do we have a list of people waiting?
We do have a lot of we do have a list of questions, but feel free to ask.
Okay, this will be the last one, folks. I'm really sorry this will be the last one. Hopefully somebody else is thinking this as well. I thought I heard you say, when you were talking about the different sizes of the units, that one was going to be roughly 1,700 square feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I have
no.
one. Pardon me, is that question for me or?
It was, sorry, it's for the proponent.
Okay, 1,910 square feet.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I guess with that answer, what I'm trying to understand is, these will be condos, correct? Not rentals. Correct. And like, what would be the rough asking price for these units? I guess I'm trying to get a perspective. Is this a luxury project? Is this a mid-range project?
Yeah, I would think mid-range. I would like to have a price tag on available in this building for under $400,000, and I think those the larger 3-bedroom suites somewhere around 600,000. So I think that's, I don't think they're luxury condos. This product is built to satisfy a number of budgets, and I've said this before. I think here, if we're able to build something like this, we'd be able to put someone with $400,000 budget or less would be able to live in Varsity View in a new home, and I don't think that exists right now.
Okay, thanks so much, and thanks for letting me ask those questions. I will be quiet and listen.
No, thank you, Councillor Block. So yeah, as we mentioned, we're going to move into some of these questions that have been published here. So this first question, I've read through it. Seems like an individual who lives quite close to the property. They have children who often go across the alley to go and play in the park. Just kind of wondering how this building, a bit concerned about how this building will impact traffic in the back alley. So if I could perhaps, have the developer, Mark, speak towards kind of their considerations for traffic and vehicle use in this back alley. And then I know that the city likely circulated our transportation and construction department on this, and any comments that might have been received through that division could be followed with Jim there after Mark's statement.
Okay, I think, and I don't know for sure, but I imagine most people will enter the alley from Cumberland Avenue and drive on the new paved alley and enter the parkade. I've had traffic studies done for this type of development before, and with this many units, the traffic impact is insignificant. You'll have a few extra cars come and go during peak hours, and that's it. I really don't think that parking or any traffic in the alley will be an issue at all.
All right.
So as part of the internal referral process, we did have our transportation department review the application. They didn't note any concerns related to traffic safety as a result of this development.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Jim. Moving on to the next question here, we have, is Cumberland Avenue considered a corridor street? Is Main Street? So perhaps a question to direct to Jim there. Are these streets considered corridor streets?
So these streets are not the same kinds of corridors that we're talking about for corridor planning. Those are the major arterials, the bus rapid transit, the frequent transit service corridor. So in this case, that is 8th Street. Cumberland and Main Street, while they may be major streets, are not the same level of major corridor that we're talking about. So when we talk about corridor planning, when we talk about the goals of the growth plan to 500,000 and the corridor transformation plan, the separation is on the hierarchy of streets in the city. So in this case, we're really focused on 8th Street being that primary transportation transit corridor that things will then build off of.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. So the next question here is it's more of a statement, kind of just looking into how the city establishes its policies and how developers work within that. Jim, could you perhaps speak to the city's policy development process and how developers submit applications in that regard?
Sure. So, the city, we have policies in place at the city council approved policies contained now, particularly in the new official community plan. And Mr. Kelleher and any developer is essentially required to develop in line with those policies. I think at this stage, given the newness of the corridor, planning policies. We're in a new transition phase into this sort of new conversation about how infill development can be successfully incorporated into the corridor growth area.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. So for this next question here, just kind of wondering whether a 4-story apartment style building is considered a sensitive transition to protect low density residential areas. Perhaps, you know, Mark, perhaps you could speak towards how this building incorporated some design features to transition in this area, and then Jim, perhaps you could speak to some of the zoning that would come into play here.
Okay, well, I'll just start with, you know, the zoning is, they call it RM4 by agreement, and the by agreement part of it is all the sensitive considerations that I've done for the building. An R4 zoning, if you know, without that agreement part, which, you know, I like, you know, was what's designed here, you know, you have a 4-story building pushed straight up against the property line, huge walls, no big setback like I mentioned by the parking ramp smushed up against the property. I mean, that I don't think that's a sensitive development, but I think here, like I mentioned before, is we're going to have to add people to Varsity View, and the neighborhood's going to change. And here, you know, I am trying to be sensitive, and I know some of the things that I mentioned, they maybe might look like circles on a drawing, but standing inside a building, people are concerned about people looking into their backyards. Well, I dealt with that concern because I think that is a concern. If you have a building here and people are looking into your backyard, yeah, I think that would be a concern. I think if you have a house that's 24 feet high and then there's a 50-foot high sidewall right beside you, I think that's a big concern. Here you have 2 stories, maybe 24 feet high right beside you. Then when you go up to 3 stories, you're over 20 feet away. So, you know, I think that it is being sensitive to the neighborhood. I'm fully aware there's you know, lower zoning right beside it, and that is particularly why all these steps were made, to make sure that we did consider that and we, you know, incorporated that into the design.
So I think I'll give a little bit more broader context for corridor growth. One of the other land use designations that's part of the new OCP policy is something called station mixed use. And that, while it's still a medium density level of land use, it's a 6-story, 6, sometimes 7-story scale of development. And those are to be located adjacent to new BRT stations. So in this case, there is anticipated to be a BRT station at Cumberland Park on 8th Street. And so if we think about, sort of take a step back from this individual development site and think of the corridor growth area kind of larger, that corner of Cumberland and 8th Street with the park adjacent to that on either side of Cumberland could be higher density development at that, as I said, at that 6-story development. So the transition is from 8th Street. That's where that higher density starts, and the transition down, sort of down into the adjacent neighborhood. And again, as I said earlier, up to that kind of magic 250-meter boundary where that corridor growth area is. So while I can understand that people might have a hard time seeing that a 4-story building adjacent to a 2-story house is a transition or a sensitive transition to density, to development, the transition actually begins at 8th Street. So the value and the benefit of having Cumberland Park there is that it helps to offset kind of all that density, helps to balance out and provide that kind of breathing space within the neighborhood, as 8th Street is the boundary of the neighborhood. To Mr. Keller's point, I do think that there's an attempt to provide a transition within the building itself from the 4-story component to the 2-story component on the west side of it, adjacent to the residential development. So there's sort of a number of different types of transition at play here. It's not always going to be the same form of development, as I mentioned. And so we're trying to balance off some of these new needs and this development proposal with the intention of the corridor residential, the new OCP policies, and ultimately to the growth plan to 500,000.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. So this next question here, I'll actually respond to directly. The question is from an individual who's just waiting to hear from this presentation before submitting a letter or submitting their comments. So just wondering whether they could still submit letters regarding this development. And I can say that yes, for the next few weeks, comments will remain open and letters may be sent in. We also have Jim's contact still available on the Engage page, which has his email and phone number. So that'll be the next few weeks here. There will also be notification on our Engage page once and if this this application goes forward to City Council, and they will be accepting comments at the public hearing. So that information will also be available on our Engage page on the City website. So moving on to the next question here. It seems like a really good fit for this particular corner. Has the developer done anything like this before? Mark, could you perhaps speak to this question here, please?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We've built down the street at 1010 Main Street. We built the Tribeca condos. That was a project, went very well. We had to get rezoning again for that property. And, you know, there was a lot of the same objections and a lot of the same concerns that I'm seeing tonight about before we started that project. And I can tell you that, you know, since then, I've heard from almost everybody that had comments about it before, and nearly all of them were satisfied in the end with the project. So it's really hard to look further down the road to see how something's gonna turn out. And so I'm, you know, I just, that's important because this looks like you know, a big building on a piece of paper, but you know what's happening here is we're adding people, we're adding neighbors, we're going to add friends, we're going to add families, we're going to add people to Varsity View. People love Varsity View, including the people that live there now. So I think that, you know, the more people we can add to the neighborhood to enjoy one of Saskatoon's finest neighborhoods, the better. And a couple comments about you know, some concerns. Alley traffic at the Tribeca, not an issue. Parking, not an issue. There's underutilized parking at the building. You know, garbage, recycling, no problem. You know, so those are some of the common you know, concerns that people have when they see projects like this. And you know, it's very similar down the street, and none of those are a problem. So
excellent, thank you, Mark. For this next question here, we have the city's own local area plan for Varsity View, presumably identifies areas north of 14th Street and Cumberland as natural places for higher density development, and placed high value on the character of the core neighborhoods on the south of 14th. Why are we now looking to go away from that? And then kind of a general statement at the end, just looking for some clarification on the boundaries, the perimeter streets, and defining perimeter streets in relation to Varsity View. Jim, could I perhaps get you to respond to this question?
Sure thing. So we look at all the policies for corridor growth and for this development, this proposal does align with the policies that are in the new OCP. We're not moving away from anything identified in the LAP. As I mentioned as part of the presentation, we now have a revised policy framework that we're evaluating this application against. We're also not proposing any changes to the perimeter streets for the LAP. We're not touching the LAP in that regard at all.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. All right, for this next question is a bit challenging. Can you please explain the streets on slide 5? So if I could perhaps get Haven to go back to slide 5, please. All right, so it looks like just some general questions about the streets that are shown outlined on this map here, and these are going to be our corridor growth area streets. So Jim, perhaps if you could just explain what these corridors are meant to represent and what this image is meant to convey.
Sure. So this corridor growth area map, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's included in the corridor transformation plan. It's also included in the urban form and structure map of the OCP. It's really, as I said, it started as our study area boundaries, so we could put some boundaries around the conversation for infill growth and development along the corridors, focusing that conversation related to the corridors. We worked through a number of different alternatives for what felt like an appropriate distance from those corridors and settled on a 250-meter distance. It's approximately a 5-minute walk, and that's often a walkshed that's used for walksheds to transit and those kinds of things. So the map shows, as you see the different colored lines on the map, the kind of base map, you'll see red, green, and blue. Those are actually the BRT lines, the BRT red, green, and blue lines that run through the city. On the detail, you see a slight blue line, which is on 8th Street as well, trying to just identify where the BRT blue line is on that portion of 8th Street.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. All right, so for this next question, I've kind of read through it a few times. It sounds to be somebody who's outlining that is conveying that 5 out of 14 lots on the block in question have been redeveloped, and that, you know, this may exceed the 25% increase in population, the balanced approach that the city has advertised. Jim, I'm not too sure, has there been any circulations that have been going out to this balanced approach of increasing population density? Is this a question that we would perhaps have to refer to a different division after the meeting?
No, that 25% balanced approach to growth is in the growth plan to 500,000. That's 25% across the city, not neighborhood by neighborhood. And so at the time in 2016, the population of the city at that time, the target is roughly 22,000 new dwelling units focused within the corridor growth. So while this may or may not exceed 25% within that block, it's really about a citywide target to achieve that level of new residential development focused within the corridor growth area. So that will play out differently across the city. It's not about one neighborhood or one main corridor taking the bulk of that. The corridor planning team will lead those conversations through the corridor planning process, and they will find a way to balance that target number for new residential units across the entire corridor growth area and BRT network.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. A question that I might put to both the developer and the city here. So just an inquiry noting that east of the 1400 block, so across Cumberland, there are several multiple unit dwellings. And just saying, you know, these are already existing. They already have access to the grocery stores and all of the amenities adjacent to 8th Street. just kind of a question of why we would contemplate introducing this similar type of development across Cumberland into Varsity View. And perhaps I could put this question to Jim first, just from a planning perspective, why this would be contemplated. And then Mark, maybe just a statement of how you think this development will work in relation to these neighboring multiple unit dwellings, and why we should contemplate having it across Cumberland here.
I would say again that this is in line with the intent of the corridor growth area and those new policies speaking to infill development within that corridor growth area. So it's not on a block by block basis. This is a large area of the city that we're talking about. It might only seem like a short distance from 8th Street and 250 meters, but it's actually in its entirety a fairly sizable area for the city. So it's really within that corridor growth area that we're looking for an increase in density and to manage manage infill development.
Yeah, and I guess my comments would echo the same. The corridor growth plan is meant to grow the corridor. So those buildings, multifamily buildings on Main Street further west are already there. Those buildings are all 30, 40 years old. They don't have features and amenities in living space that people are asking for today. So, there's going to be new growth, and there's a desire out there for people who want to live in around the corridor, close to in Varsity View, and have some new features and amenities that a new home would bring.
Excellent. Thank you both. There was another question in here. It looks like our manager, Daryl Dawson, has responded to. So yes, there are no live chat features over this Teams live event, so we can't have statements from the public verbally. However, once again, I would encourage anybody who would like to speak about this development to reach out to our project lead here, Jim Charlebois. Phone number is available on our Engage page, and that will be up for the next couple weeks here. So the next question after that is, why not new infill homes instead of a large condo? It's already zoned for that. So perhaps I could get, I could get both to respond to this as well. If Mark, would you maybe like to speak towards why your firm would like to develop a multi-unit dwelling instead of regular homes here, low density homes, and then Jim speak towards why this is, I suppose, maybe more about the densification that is being proposed here from a zoning perspective.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Warren. That's a good question. I've looked at that. We've tried to market those lots for a number of years recently, and there's just no desire for having a single house on the corner of Cumberland. So it's just not marketable. So I mean, that from a business perspective, like I could build something there to rent a property. But I'll give you an example of what could be built there right now with the current zoning. There could be 5 houses there. All those 5 houses could have either a garage suite at the back or a basement suite in the basement. Could be left with, that's 10 units for example. There'd be 5 homes with 5 suites. And if you look at that scenario, 5 homes, 5 suites. Now what happens is you have 10 people, you have a garbage can and recycling bin for each suite. So you have 2 garbage bins, 2 recycle bins for every one of those houses. Just imagine that look on garbage day. I just don't think that that's possible, but I just think this is the better option. This is the direction where the city wants to go. We need some density to the neighborhood. We need some density to the city, and we need along the corridor. The other issue with the alternative of 5 units there and 5 suites. And I'm not saying like that that's a possibility for that same piece of land. The parking, you're required 2 parking stalls for that. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you look at bedrooms, for example, I like this stat is you have 5 homes with suites. That's 25 bedrooms. You have 5 double garages. That's 10 parking stalls. So if you take a bedroom to parking ratio, that's 40% stall per bed ratio. This building here gives you that same ratio of 87.5% of parking per bed. So if you're worried about parking, this type of development has far better parking than it would with single family homes. If you're worried about garbage cans and recycling bins, I've heard that come up. This development has its own designated private collection in the back. So those are just some of the, that's an alternative, and those are some of the downsides to that type of alternative. So I think it's important to just, when you think about it, you got to think about I guess like the full potential of that property with the current zoning. Thanks for the question.
So I'll just respond maybe a bit more generally to the question about density, whether it, a 2-story single family dwelling on the site. We have, as I mentioned, the growth plan to 500,000, and the OCP speaks to infill targets and density targets. This site is very well suited in its location to adding density. It's less than a 5-minute walk to the proposed BRT line and BRT station at Cumberland Park. It's adjacent to a park. It's close to shopping and other services. It is very much ideally suited to a higher level of residential density. And I think that while this is greater density, and I can see that some people are a little bit upset about that, this is a very good location for density that is measured in its sort of medium density, if you like. So we do have to find opportunities throughout the city to increase our density, increase our residential density. And as outlined in the growth plan to 500,000, that's for a very particular reason. There are servicing requirements and servicing costs associated with outward expansion that we are trying to work against, that kind of long-term cost to the city for road and sewer extensions and construction and maintenance, and infill development is a way to help balance that.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. So that was for, there are 2 questions next to each other. They're both essentially the same question that were previously addressed by Jim and Mark here. So thank you very much. I have the next question here. The next question here is just someone expressing a bit of concern about the maintenance of property on the block, and perhaps we could just get the developer to speak towards how they intend to maintain the new property and ensure that it just makes the contributes to the beautification of the neighborhood. If I could, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question, and I guess first of all, like, I'm aware of the condition of the property, and I apologize. It's been a real challenge to keep the property in a state where we can have where we can take care of it. We've had several problems with break-ins. We've had several robberies. We've had the police attend a number of times to the property. So it is an eyesore, and it's a problem. And I'm working to try and change that. This is my current idea for that. And it's not that I don't respect the neighborhood. I drive down Main Street virtually every day of my life. I own houses on Main Street. And I feel bad. I genuinely feel bad at the condition of that property. It's just at this point in time, as I mentioned before, it's just not a marketable property. If I thought I could, if I could take down the house that's there and build a house and sell it, well, I would have done that by now. So, and I've attempted to do that by now. So, although it's a delay here, you know, I do appreciate the assets and strengths and beauty of the block, and that's particularly why I'm proposing a project like this tonight.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. Next question here is once again for Mark, just some questions about the design of the two buildings. So I believe there are 24 units in the Tribeca, and yet this development is in a smaller footprint, a smaller area, and has 26 units. What other differences are there between the two structures, I believe? So Mark, perhaps you could speak to the design differences there.
Yeah, the major difference is 1-bedroom units. So Tribeca, for example, has one bedroom unit. This development proposing has 6 1-bedroom units. The smallest unit at Tribeca is around 700 square feet. We're down to 650 here, and we have 4 of them. So it's a size difference. So it seemed to me that 1-bedroom units, there's you know, this is maybe not very recent with COVID here, but prior to when I was designing, we had a lot of interest in 1-bedroom units. So that's the major difference. Size-wise, it's very similar, but more 1-bedrooms. So thanks for the question.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. If this development went ahead, what would the quote-unquote map amendment from low-density residential to corridor residential show exactly? Perhaps I could get Jim to speak towards what this map amendment, how this map amendment would appear on the official community plan.
Sure. If we could go back to the slide that showed the map options, I think it's slide 6. So you'll see the map on the left shows the current, the map on the right shows what would be proposed. You see that purple box is where we would apply the new corridor residential map amendment. Our land use designations go from center line of road to center line of road. So that's why it's not just within the red box, but it actually extends out into the road right of way. You can see that on both maps. The darker of the 2 yellows is the low density residential, the red is commercial, and the pale yellow is simply residential. So what you would see on the amended OCP map is the map on the right, the proposed, that shows that new purple square for corridor residential.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. Next one is more of just a comment. This development looks amazing, would be a great addition to the neighborhood, would provide a good buffer into the neighborhood. So we'll leave that there. Next question here is a very good question. So could this similar development be done on every corner on Main Street between Cumberland and Clarence, which are within 250 meters of 8th Street? Jim, I believe this is in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so if we could, sorry for the flipping back and forth, could we move back to that corridor growth area slide? I think it's slide 5. So this corridor growth area map is quite important because it does show the extent of where the corridor policies apply. It's more specifically, it's the only places in the city where the new corridor policies, not only the corridor growth area policy, but the new land use designations would be applied. So in essence, that whole swath of land on either side of the major BRT corridors is to some degree open for development. So we will expect to see in the long term medium density development, mixed use development, commercial development along the major corridors close to BRT stations and in between BRT stations. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the corridor residential designation is to help provide a more sensitive transition, a residential only transition into those existing neighborhoods. But again, there will be increases of density proposed within this corridor growth area over the long term. And again, that's to help achieve not only the new OCP targets and the new OCP policies, but also the targets in the growth plan to 500,000.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. Another general comment here. I live in the neighborhood and I'm all for this. It'll help with the future bus rapid transit. Next one is a suggestion. Once again, just suggesting that the future public hearings be held so that people are allowed to speak. So I would once again just like to reiterate that we are holding this online once again just to gather together without being physically near one another to conduct a public consultation, and that if you would like to verbally speak towards the development or your concerns about the development, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to our project lead, Jim Charlebois, whose phone number is available on the City of Saskatoon website on our Engage page. The next question appears to be more of a general question about the rezoning process and whether there is any recognition that rezoning can oftentimes have an impact on people who have been living in the area and how their presence can be represented in this process. So, Jim, perhaps I could just get you to speak towards the rezoning process and how existing landowners are taken into consideration during this.
Sure. Sorry, everyone. My video capabilities through my laptop have just ended. This public information meeting is one of those opportunities for current residents of a neighborhood to provide feedback into development proposals. And so it's an important part of the development process. As I mentioned earlier, the corridor planning team engaged in a almost 2.5 year public consultation, public engagement process for corridor planning, talking about land uses, talking about densities, transition of densities, those kinds of things, before the land use designations were created for the new OCP. So there's been an extensive feedback into those land use designations and into the corridor transformation plan. The other way for people to be involved is in the formal public hearing. Public hearing has not yet been scheduled. So that's the formal point in time when residents can speak in favor or against a rezoning application at council and let council know what their thoughts are directly.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. So the next question is definitely angled more towards Mark here. What is the expected timeline to build? It's a question about a bit further down the line here. So what is the expected timeline to build, and where would the staging area be for construction? What would you do for parking for contractors? And I'll turn this over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. Good question. I haven't nailed down a timeline, but if the proposal is successful, we still got to make construction drawings, and so I think at the very earliest, perhaps it'd be the fall of 2021, and then as far as parking for contractors, I've had several ideas about that. That's certainly a challenge. We run into that all the time when we're working on projects in Varsity View. It's a little bit better closer to Main Street, but I'd look at options where we'd try and have people park off-site and commute to work would be one of them, or if we can rent some parking from one of the adjacent businesses. I've had some brief conversations about that. Just to keep the traffic, particularly the construction traffic, down during construction. But I understand it's frustrating during any construction project with the parking. But my anticipation would be probably about 18 to 24 months. Lots of those would be near the end where parking would be a little bit later. So.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. We have some general comments kind of at the end here. I'd also like to point out that we are 5 minutes out from our cutoff time at 8:30. So if anybody has any other questions, please get them in shortly here. So a statement here: for a 4-story building, it sure does not stand out. The top story is almost not visible, and it transitions down nicely to the house next door. Next comment here: more eyes on the park at night. It's going to make the park much safer. It is kind of sketchy to walk in there at night right now. Happy to have more people around watching it. And a question for the developer: when can my grandma move in? Mark, could you perhaps speak to that question?
Well, good question. Thank you. Probably somewhere between fall 2022, and I'm happy to take your grandma's name. I'll give her a personal tour anytime. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Okay, so we do have some more comments yet to be published here. Love the direction the city is heading. It's a positive one. We have okay, great. Okay, with the new growth plan and this type of build, are there limitations on how many builds of this size and magnitude can be within a certain distance from one another? That's a great question to send over to Jim, if you could speak to that.
Just sort of wanting to see if I understand that correctly. And I don't necessarily want to repeat myself, but the density, the infill targets are for that entire corridor growth area. So there isn't sort of a distance that there's a 4-story building at the intersection of these 2 cross streets, and so therefore there can't be another one within a certain distance. It's not really built like this. We're looking at, in the corridor planning program, sort of figuring out where the density best fits. It's certainly, again, early in the transition into our new policy framework for the OCP, but through this kind of process, this is how we actually help to provide council with more information for when they're going to make their decision on the rezoning application. It does, as we've talked about through a number of questions tonight, it does tick the box for lots of different policy objectives, but it still does land with council to make the final decision on any rezoning application.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. We have one last comment here that is against the application, but aside from that, I think we should be good to close things off the evening. We're at 8:29. With that, I'd like to formally close off this evening's event. So, thank you once again to all the city staff who helped put this together. I know there's quite a few of us here tonight just helping to keep everything running smoothly. Folks out there, you wouldn't believe how tough it is to set up one of these things sometimes. I'd really like to thank the applicant for taking the time to come and present tonight. You did a wonderful job, Mark, and thank you for taking the time, and as well as Councillor Block for the wonderful welcoming words and for getting the conversation started this evening. So, thank you all once again, and remember that the Engage page will be up for the next few weeks here with our project lead, Jim Charlebois. His contact is on there. Will be able to be contacted if you have any direct comments, and keep an eye on that Engage page for when if the public hearing moves forward to City Council for this proposal. So thank you once again, and have a wonderful evening all.